He is the co-founder, and he's also a player in the Premier Lacrosse League that finished their 2020 season in a bubble. 0 positive tests over the course of their 3-week tournament last year. And now the upcoming season for the PLL is set to begin on June 4th at Gillette. And all regular season and playoff matchups will stream on Peacock, with some matches also being available on NBCSN on the Big and BC. Paul Rabil is here on the Rich Eisen Show. Nice to meet you, Paul. How are you, sir?
Great, Rich. I don't think I need to spend much time beyond that, honestly. That was great. That was a great lead-in.
No, you bet. So thanks for coming on, Paul. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to meet you.
I'll be on your podcast if you want. We'll chat then. No,
I would love that.
This has got to be you've got to be fired up, man. I mean, this is a big deal for your league that you have co-founded and you're playing in. You've got to be psyched.
Yeah, we're pumped. This is our 3rd season, and unbeknownst to probably a lot of your listeners or even a lot of avid or passive sports fans in the U.S., is professional lacrosse had existed for 20 years prior to us co-founding the PLL back in 2018, and it was called Major League Lacrosse. So another thing that we did this off-season is merge with the MLL, except different than in ABA, NBA, or NFL, AFL. We took on the future rights of naming and business operations versus in those situations, typically the incumbent move forward in subsequent seasons. But we had a bit of a clash in 2018. We felt like pro lacrosse could take a path similar to MLS or UFC over the last 15 years because of new media like Peacock and technology. And we feel like because of participation in the U.S. and beyond that we're on that path. So a different model, but we're definitely excited about where professional lacrosse can go.
And again, it's, each team does have a home city, but you're all playing on the same weekend in a stadium traveling around the country, and Gillette being your first spot, and then the home of Kennesaw State University, Fifth Third Bank Stadium in Atlanta is your second spot. And then Baltimore, Maryland, right there in your alma mater, Johns Hopkins. You're going to be playing in Long Island and Minnesota, and Minneapolis. I mean, these are some considerable fields that you're playing on starting June 4th and culminating in the middle of September.
I mean, Rich, we were pretty objective in the way that we looked at professional lacrosse. It's a smaller sport. There's 2 million participants and 10 million fans. And we weren't going to try to do what maybe other leagues had done over the last 20 years and try to replicate Major League Baseball or the NBA out of the gates. And it's so much lineage and heritage and ownership of venues that go into building a professional sports league.
Right.
So we looked at F1 as a model or tour-based models, and then we looked at what works in lacrosse annually, and it's the college Final Four, where you have 4 teams. The same thing happens in basketball. They descend in a major market venue, and they play over the course of the weekend, so there's this supply-demand curve that they hit. So where we're at is still our early stages of building interest and year-over-year increase in viewership and sponsorship through this tour-based model. And then we think over the next 3 to 5 years, if we continue to see this growth, that we can flip to a city-based and sell franchises and go that path. So it's definitely a different twist to what people are used to consuming for team sports. But in the end, you still get the best players on the field every weekend.
Right here on Peacock, the PLL coming to you right here on this outstanding streamer starting on June 4th. Paul Rabil, the co-founder, along with a player of the Premier Lacrosse League here on the Rich Eisen Show. You're also a podcaster. And season 3 of your podcast, Suiting Up with Paul Rabil podcast. One of your first guests is a rarity in this business of saying yes to any interview. I know that firsthand, even though he did appear as our first NFL guest in the history of my show on Peacock last year. Is Bill Belichick. How did that happen for you, Paul? How'd that come across?
Yeah, well, similar, I guess, to co-founding a league is it's rare that maybe athletes cross over into business or media. And I don't take it lightly because you're a seasoned professional at what you do, and there's so much nuance to interviewing. There's so much nuance to building a company. But I think at the core of what we all do is this curiosity and relationships. And so with Bill, he grew up playing lacrosse. I met him at my alma mater, given that he's from Maryland, and we built a relationship. And when I got probably about 10 years into my career, I launched a podcast because I was tipped off by some friends around the early stages of it. But they were like, hey, you keep these interesting relationships amongst other athletes in other sports and other coaches in other sports where there isn't that traditional maybe fear or a barrier that's put up that you get from the press. And I think it's also at the moment where conversation is moving into more honesty and authenticity, and you get less of this programmable answer that you would in a typical press conference. You get that in the long-form interview because you can work them in. But with Bill, it was kind of like, hey, I remember showing up at his office because we had scheduled this podcast, and we have a lot of trust between us. And I pop open 2 mics, and I think he was expecting maybe me to record it on a phone.
Yes.
And he looked at me and he goes, so is this going to get out to a lot of people? And I said, Coach, I think it has a chance to get out to a few million people. And he was like, so we probably should hold back on the swearing. And I was like, yeah, we can do whatever you want. We pressed record, and like 30 minutes in, he's talking about how Lawrence Taylor was the greatest football player he's ever coached. And, you know, he kind of skipped around maybe some of the disciplinary stuff that he was responsible for during his time coaching LT, but he shared some really insightful things about what it takes to be a great football player in his league.
So if I want Belichick to work blue, I tell him this is only going to be heard by about 15 people? Is that what I should, is that how I should go about my business?
You get into his office and you put up some, a little bit like a shady podcast kit.
Yep.
And maybe less of the glitz and glamour, all the professionalism, and you might get a little bit more out of him.
All right. Good to know. Good to know. The yes or no questions are something that he shuts down. I know that. And
right.
And so fantastic. And interestingly enough, your first weekend in the PLL is at Gillette, and Chris Hogan, who a lot of folks know from the NFL, he's a teammate of yours? He's left the NFL and he's in the PLL and he's taken up lacrosse now? Is that really what he's doing?
Yeah, I mean, Chris is a unique athlete. He's a lacrosse player first. I know that because we've been shooting this docu on him, and he played 4 years at Penn State. He was an honorable mention All-American, but loved football, went out for it because, for what I had talked about earlier, Rich, pro lacrosse was really non-existent, even though the property had existed. I mean, our average wage in MLL for over a decade was $8,000 for the season. No health care, no distribution. And so he kind of looked at that opportunity and said, I'm going to try to play in the NFL. And then he popped off during that one season of Hard Knocks when he was trying out for the Dolphins, and they called him 7-Eleven. And again, going back to Bill has an affinity for lacrosse, having played it, and he's brought on a few lacrosse players. Will Yateman was another one, and he looks at that creativity. We talked about me coming over and trying out for the Patriots at one point. I'm glad I didn't, but he's known for kind of sifting through that talent, and obviously had a great run with Chris, winning some Super Bowls, and now Chris has seen the growth of the PLL, and I think looked at where his career trajectory was going in the NFL and said, hey, before I just shut down, let me try to get back and have an imprint in lacrosse. He went undrafted in our entry draft, and then got picked up by the Cannon team I play on, and I'll see him at training camp next week, and hopefully he makes a roster.
Wow. So he's trying. So is he like the Tebow of this operation right now? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, he sure looks like Tebow. The guy's a freaking tank.
No, I'm just saying he's been out of the sport for a long time, and you have a relationship with him, and you're just going to give him a shot. I mean, that's basically the way. You're like the Urban Meyer of this right now.
The interesting thing that you called out is, I'm a co-founder and player.
Yeah.
It's not going to last much longer. I'm 35, and so I still think I got it on the field. But
there you go.
Everyone thinks I flip burgers and publish our tweets across the league and make decisions for coaches. But there's some things that feel coincidental, and there's others that the Cannons formerly were in Boston, as they were a franchise we brought over from the MLL through that merger. And the coach as well of the team, it has an affinity for kind of New England sports, and saw and had conversations with Chris and decided to make a bet on him. But we'll see what he does. I mean, I know he's training his ass off, and he's a player that can play both ways. So he'll probably come out and play defensive midfield, which is basically like cornerback, and then get the ball in his stick, go down to offense, and be a threat on the offensive end.
So he's really the Troy Brown of the Cannons, maybe. I mean,
That's
we're just
probably it.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe a Deion Sanders if he can flip around and play two sports.
All right, I like it. I guess before I let you go, I got to pull on this strand. Belichick thought maybe you could try out, what, receiver? Is that what you're going to do? Or what would you?
I wanted to play receiver. I'll send you a clip when we get offline.
Okay.
I wanted to play receiver. He wanted me to be a strong safety. I wasn't fast enough from just a straight 40-yard dash, as
right.
You're quite familiar with it. But I tried to pitch him. Rich Eisen over the last 15 years has improved his 40 time. I can improve my 40 time. And we were going back and forth. I think what he was saying was, look, your size and work ethic and commitment to sport bodes better in that position. And we went back and forth. This was back when I was 23, and I was captain of Team USA at the time, and we kind of came to an agreement that it was the best decision to stay in lacrosse.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it makes sense. Hey, Paul, congrats on the Peacock deal.
Appreciate it.
And in advance of heading off to Gillette and your training camp to get ready for the PLL season, that again will be on regular season and playoff matchups streaming right here on Peacock. Some matches available on NBCSN, and then the final, the championship week 11 in Washington, D.C. will be on NBC. Congratulations on all that, and let's stay in touch.
Appreciate it, Rich. Thanks for having me.
You got it. That's Paul Rabil. Check out his podcast, Suiting Up with Paul Rabil, and where all podcasts can be acquired at Paul Rabil, Rabil, on Twitter and Instagram. Hey, you watched all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Watch more right here.